I think a lot of people will come into property investing and development thinking, oh, this will be easy. The first 5 deals that any investor or developer or whoever does, there'll be mistakes made. There'll be things that they don't do quite right. And I'm a firm believer that you learn far more from your defeats than you do from your victories. You've got to have that willingness to pick yourself up and go again. Every auction house in London will have a reserve price. There's already been a minimum price, selling price that's set. Where one starts is not the point, it's where one finishes. I said to them, if you let me guide it at 1.45 million, I know there'll be interest. We ended up selling for 2.75 million. I knew that if I'd said, let's guide it at 2.7 plus, I'd have had no interest. People would think I was mad. There's always ones that stick out in your mind where people have bought things without really understanding what it is they're buying. The mistakes tend to come from people who are inexperienced and haven't taken the right advice or haven't looked at it properly. We have certain buyers who buy nothing but problem property because they know that their skills and their experience are sufficient that they can fix those problems and then they can make their profit.
Strettons is an auction house I've personally used in the past and have an excellent experience. Our guest, Andrew Brown, is the Director of Auctions and has a wealth of experience in the auction sector. So we really hope you enjoy. Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Property People. Today, I am thrilled to be joined by Mr. Andrew Brown. How are you today, Andrew?
Very well, thank you. Thank you for having me along.
Good. Andrew, quick intro. You have been in property for over 25 years, having started out as a surveyor, then an acquisitions manager, then a land manager, before landing in the auction room in 2004, over 20 years ago. You're an experienced and dynamic auctioneer and property professional with a wealth of knowledge. I've spent some time with you on a stage especially, and it was very captivating in terms of the way that you were speaking to the audience, very much from a place of experience, but very articulate as well, the way you put things. You placed a lot of emphasis, quote unquote, on putting my people and my clients first and believe that going the extra mile is always repaid many times over, which I really like, and it's something that I'd like us to talk about here.
Sure.
But before we dive into all of that, I'd like to know a little bit more about you.
Okay.
And who was Andrew at school? What type of person were you? And did you always know that you were going to be in land planning, auctions, property?
It's a really good question. I think I started out when I was at school. Academia wasn't really my thing. I was probably bright enough to be able to breeze through certain subjects without really giving a great deal of effort. And I think that my struggle, was always if I didn't feel particularly engaged with the subject, I kind of lost interest quite quickly. So I kind of scraped through my exams. I was always far more interested in sport. I played rugby and cricket, and that was and boxed, and those were all the things that I loved to do. And so I had a great time at school, but I think my teachers probably wouldn't have said I was a model student. But I think that, and when I was younger, I toyed with the idea of joining the army or the Marines. That was at the time was my goal, and I think it was only in sixth form when I really started to think that there were other alternatives out there. And it was an interesting story in terms of my getting into property. The first firm that I worked for, I had started doing some things for my girlfriend's mum at the time, because she was a surveyor, had her own firm. And so I was just doing little bits and pieces in my summer vacations, and that continued on through university. And it was only when I got to, I finished my politics degree, that she said to me, this is my then girlfriend's mum, well, look, you're really good at what you do. Have you ever thought about a career in property, becoming a surveyor? And I hadn't really thought about it. This was just a job I did for some pocket money during the vacations. So I started working for her, and the then girlfriend became my wife. So we still have a very good relationship. She's still a surveyor, still working, even though she's into her late 60s now. It kind of spiraled from there. I was doing acquisition work for her. It was only really then that I felt that I'd outgrown that sort of acquisition type role, that I very much landed on my feet with getting into auctioneering. And it was a firm called Edison's up in Leeds who first took me on. I saw an advert in the Auction Post, and I thought, well, that kind of fits. That seems like something that I think I would enjoy. And look, for me, it's been a real round peg in a round hole situation, in that I love property, and I really enjoyed the acquisition side of things. It's very active and very dynamic. But I think that the whole ethos of auction very much appeals to my skill set. And I've been fortunate enough to find something within property that I've been well rewarded for, that I've been successful at, and that I really enjoy. I'm one of those idiots who goes to work with a smile on their face in the morning because auctions is always really exciting. And I always said this, it's slightly different now when doing auctions with the online auctions or the live broadcast auctions. But I always used to think, doing the ballroom auctions, that you have a good auction, you drive home and you feel bulletproof. It's an amazing feeling being on the rostrum and everything going well. It's slightly different when it's not going so well, but it's but no. So that was the journey into property was one I hadn't really anticipated. My family, both my parents are in banking, so no real connection with property prior to meeting my girlfriend's mother. So I'm eternally grateful to both my wife now and my mother-in-law.
So from sports to a degree in politics, why did you choose politics out of interest?
Because I had no idea what I wanted to do. Politics was something I had an interest in, and it was more the philosophy side that intrigued me. And it was just one of those situations when you did before, student loans didn't exist in my day, so it was certainly tuition fees didn't exist in my day. That you're going to go to university, choose something you're going to enjoy, and it was. I did enjoy politics, but there was no real direction to it. So as I say, it was only really until because it was part of doing the work in my holidays that inspired me to do my postgrad in property valuation and management. So that kind of that was much more vocational.
Sure.
Led me into surveying with it being an RICS cognate degree. But no, politics was just something that I had a ready interest in, and I loved it. It was great. I mean, again, I focused an awful lot on sport at university and just about scraped through. But it's only a means to an end to get you to the next step.
And then so. The auction room, which is somewhat, I don't know, for me it feels very chaotic.
Yeah.
In that, I remember there's a guy that I think you know as well, Jay Howard. Mm-hmm. He describes it as this kind of roller coaster where you going right to the top to the day of the auction. Yeah. You've got an auction, I think, only a week away from today.
Yeah, on Tuesday. Yeah.
So it's it all really gets really intense up into that moment. And then you've got this kind of almost sense of relief as the auction happens. But you've got probably another one that's going to happen 6 weeks away. So it's kind of like you're on this merry-go-round constantly, where you've got this tension building up and you've got this hurry to get everything done on a certain time, otherwise you're going to miss it. So most likely it's organized chaos. But from the outside looking in, it just feels like, how do you keep up with it?
I think that...
You must enjoy it.
Oh, I do, very much so. And I think even 20 years on, I still get butterflies on the morning of an auction. Exactly. And I don't think you'd be human if you didn't. But it's not a fear thing, it's a sense of anticipation. The auction day is the culmination of all of the work that you and the team put in over the 4-week marketing period and the build-up prior to that. And it really is that climax, if you like, of all of that energy that goes into making it happen. And so it's something that I think we all revel in, we all enjoy. And there are times where it does feel like one more plate starts spinning, this is going to be out of control. But amazingly, whatever team I've worked in, you always seem to be able to pull it back and keep everything moving and everything going. But you certainly are under pressure, and it's one of the key things with the role of an auction surveyor or an auctioneer, or even the guys who work in our admin team, being able to be calm under pressure is really important, but also just anticipate what those bumps in the road are going to be. So, touch wood, we always seem to bump through okay, but yeah, it can be quite frenetic. But you're right about the fact that there is an emotional release, after an auction. Quite often, I'll find in the week afterwards, I'll start getting a cold. Because I think it's almost like your body is allowing you to be ill, whereas it won't when you're building up to the auction. But again, the other thing that you touched on as well, you're quite right. We will finish that May sale next week, then we're straight into building for July. So it doesn't really stop. I mean, there are quieter periods. You tend to find that no one has an auction in August, for example, and most people will have an auction no later than perhaps the second week in December. So there are periods, where you'll have that slightly more quiet time, and this is why I tend to take most of my holiday at sort of late December, early January, because it's the best time to, and it means that you're not missing out on anything. But and I do think that most people who come into auctions absolutely love it, or they hate it. So they last 6 months, or they stay for a lifetime.
Yeah. That's interesting, actually. Yeah, because even Jay and Piotr as well, who I know probably most closely connected to auctions, they seem like they're in it for a lifetime. These guys have had a taste for it, and I touched it, and I was like, I can't deal with the pace of this thing. It's just too hectic. It's trying to find the deal in an auction. I've always found very, very difficult, because by the time you do all the due diligence, it takes time, and you got to do on the numbers, and you got to go to see the property, and then by the time, and if you do it on one, you can't go to the auction, you probably get outbid, and then you think, okay, well, the next one, but then you're running around a lot for doesn't feel like. So the question is, how do you find below market value deals at auction?
It's difficult. I think that what you'll tend to find with any auction catalogue, not necessarily Strettons, it could be any other auction house's catalogue, there will be a group of lots that most would-be buyers will identify. The purples, as we call them, in that these are the lots that are really, really well priced, that fit the mould, that everything works with it. And those are the ones invariably that you'll get loads and loads of interest in. And they are the ones that you should be bidding on. They're the ones that are great. But of course, the problem that comes with that is that there's you and there's everybody else.
It's pretty vanilla. Everyone can wrap their head around the value add, and therefore there's a lot of demand.
And I think that means that there is going to be a lot of bidders on the day, and that if you are the person who's lucky enough to be the winning bidder, chances are you've paid pretty close to market value, if not above. So that is a challenge. Now, there are different ways, and there are different little cottage industries that people actually have in looking at lots that are perhaps a little bit, on the face of it, less desirable. Something that might look a bit trickier to deal with. Something that's got problems that, in the main, people are going to go, oh, okay, I'll stay away from that one. Those are the ones to look at. And quite often, we will find that if something goes unsold on the day, there's often a good deal to be done immediately afterwards. So there's even people who will not bother, will attend or watch an auction, not bother bidding on anything. They'll just wait and see what's left available, and then start doing their due diligence. Or they might have done a few bits of due diligence already to try and work out, well, okay, if I can get this one and I can pay less than reserve, then I'm getting a good deal, because I know what the problems are, and I know how to solve them. But I do think that the crucial thing is getting to know your auctioneer. Most auctioneers are pretty outgoing, talkative people, and when you can talk to any auctioneer, head of an auction team, they'll always invariably be delighted to talk about auctions. Most of us, we're a small breed, a small bunch, because I know hundreds of surveyors, but there's only a handful of auctioneers around, and Absolutely. We're all a fairly tight bunch, and we all rub along pretty well together. And I know them all. And they're all auction geeks. They're all guys who love auctions, who live and breathe auctions. And so getting to know them is easy. Picking up the phone, having a chat with them, talking about what they like. And once you develop a track record of buying, your phone call is going to be you're going to be the first person they call. The ideal is that before the catalogue comes out, I'll pick up the phone to someone and say, I've got a lot, I know it's just up your street. Do you want an early in on that, or do you want to get some information before anybody else? And I think that we're in the business of selling, so it makes good sense for us to try and go to the people who we know buy the sorts of things that we've got and say, "Are you in the market? Are you buying?" And so those conversations are really, really important.
And how do you determine whether a lot is better to be sold in the room, as in some, which in most cases it probably is, or possibly there's something to be said about a pre-auction sale, securing it there is equally as good as, if not better?
Well, I mean, I try and avoid pre-auction deals because from an auctioneer's perspective, I want the best lots in the room on the day, selling, which promotes us as a business and our product. And in my experience, no one ever makes a pre-auction offer out of the goodness of their heart. They're doing so because they're offering less than what they think it'll go for in the auction room. So I always look upon any pre-auction offer with a healthy dose of skepticism. Now, that's not to say that I don't do plenty of pre-auction deals, but it's got to be the right offer, and it's got to be it's got to work for all parties. I think with anything that could be bought beforehand, I'll always say to both parties, should we do an underwrite instead, which leaves it in the room, which has potential benefits to both parties. But I think that, and there are always special purchases. If we've got a strip of land and it unlocks the person's property behind something because they can develop, obviously it's worth more to them than to somebody else. But certainly if a pre-auction offer comes in at the right sort of level, if I think it's more than we'll get in the room, I'll recommend it to my client. I mean, I can count on one hand the number of times in 20 years where we've had a pre-auction offer and we've decided to go to the room and the property's not sold for more. So it's a relatively rare instance. But that said, so the deals tend to be right. And I think that, one of the things that Jay talks about in his book that he wrote with Piotr is about that lowball pre-auction offers seldom work. And I think that's right. I always say to people, put your best foot forward, because I'm not going to start a negotiation before the auction.
Exactly.
You make your offer to me, I'll put it in front of my client. If that's your best offer and they want to do it, then great, we'll do the deal. But what you've got to bear in mind is, if I've got 20 other people who are interested in that lot as well, I have a duty of care to them and to my client to make sure everyone gets a fair crack of the whip.
Absolutely. That's the whole point of an auction, right? It's on the day, everybody gets a fair crack.
Because the point is that if someone's registered to bid or if they've made a pre-auction offer themselves, albeit at a lower level, if I then turn around and say, sorry, I've sold this beforehand, naturally that person's going to come to me and say, well, hang on, Andrew, I might have paid more. So it's always, it's always important to make sure that every angle is covered when dealing with that sort of thing. But as I say, it does happen, and we're always open to those offers. Some we can't. If it's a institutional client or a local authority or it's a receivership property, then it's rare that you can do a deal. But with most private sellers, it's always possible.
Absolutely. So, assuming that I've identified a property that I really like, what are the hints and tips that you can give to somebody to be successful and win at auctions?
I mean, first and foremost, and this might sound obvious, but go and look at it. Go and look at the property.
Step one.
Step one. I mean,
is that step one?
I think it's step one. Yeah. I mean, for me, I wouldn't spend £200 on a pair of shoes without trying them on first. Yet it never ceases to amaze me the number of people who will spend hundreds of thousands of pounds, if not millions of pounds, on a property that they haven't even physically seen. Yeah. So I think that's important. And it might seem like an obvious thing to say, but it's amazing how many people don't. So I think it's crucial. And following on from that, doing one's homework. The legal pack that the seller's solicitor produces is there for good reason. Because, of course, for those who aren't aware, with an auction, because you're exchanging contracts when the hammer goes down, there's no wiggle room in getting a survey done afterwards and saying, well, hang on, the roof needs £5,000 worth of work. You can't chip your offer. That's it. You've got skin in the game at the level at the hammer price. So all of that work that would normally be done by a solicitor in terms of the conveyance is done by the seller's solicitor and produced in the form of the legal pack. So reading that very carefully and making sure that if there's anything at all you don't understand, having a solicitor also read that for you, just to be able to make sure that you've got full information, you know exactly what it is that you're buying. And I always say this at the start of every auction, if you don't know exactly what it is that you're bidding on, please don't bid. Yeah. Which again is an odd thing to say, but some people sort of often get raised eyebrows. But once the hammer goes down, it's impossible to do anything about it, or very difficult to do anything about it. So so doing one's homework is really important.
So legal pack, viewing.
Mm-hmm. It's then looking for the added value, where value can be added. And sometimes it's very obvious, sometimes less so. So making sure that you know where the angles are. You know what you can do in terms of maximizing value, and having that exit strategy. And this again is something that Jay and Piotr talk about very much in their book. Is about having that exit strategy is super, super important, which I think sometimes is overlooked by some people. They'll think, oh, it's the right property in the area that I like. It needs work to do. I can make a profit on that. And that's as far as the thinking goes. But I think actually having the exit, the most important bit where you get your money,
absolutely,
is really, really important to be looking at. And I think probably finally the other thing I would say is talk to your auctioneer. Touched on it before, but we've got a duty of care to buyers as well as our sellers to make sure we're disclosing everything. And certain things might not be immediately obvious, or just asking the questions of your auctioneer about, levels of interest. We are normally pretty open and talkative people, as I said before. So happy to talk about the property, and we want to be understand what buyers want, because we talk to our sellers a lot before we list the property. So we know what they want. And it's only until the marketing starts and people start calling us that we know what buyers want. So it's important to make sure that you have that communication, and that you ask the right questions.
And so do you get people like buyers saying, could you give that investment advice? Because I suppose that's taking like one next step of like, okay, here's a shop and uppers. And do you get any people like calling you saying, oh, that looks interesting, what can I do with it? Because then that's like, well, there's so many things. You've got to almost go away and do your own homework.
I think that's important. Certainly I will normally, on a property that I list, I'll have my own views on it. And I'll have a good understanding of what can and can't be done. So I'm always very happy to chat it out with people to try and sort of give them some ideas that they might not have thought of before. And to try and just give them the benefit of my experience. But certainly, you shouldn't go to an auction to buy something without knowing what it is that you actually want to do. And I think that doing one's own homework broadens the abilities of a buyer, of a property developer, someone who's making their first forays into auction. Because if somebody else, and I think when people start, there's always somebody helping them. Usually always someone helping them, whether it's someone from a property club, like where we go and do our talks, or whether they've got friends and family who've done these things previously. But it's the whole give a man a fish, he'll eat for a day, teach a man to fish, he'll eat for a lifetime kind of situation. So the more a person does it for themselves, then they're going to be far better at seeing those angles and identifying a property in a catalogue that might be being overlooked by others, but with that experience comes the ability to pick out what's going to be useful for it.
And that it's in the same way as like private treaty as well. In terms of value, what somebody might see in a deal is completely different to because somebody else might say, well, actually, I might be able to use the back of that shop for X, Y, and Z that I've got going on.
Correct.
And if I can do the other stuff with the shop, actually, I can afford to probably pay a little bit more than anybody else.
Yeah.
So that from that point of view, I think it's the same as the private treaty. So it's sometimes a little bit difficult, perhaps, to give too much of an influence on how to see things. It's almost the individual needs to take it upon themselves to see the value from in the eye of the beholder, I guess.
Absolutely, and I think you're 100% right with that. But I think that the more you do, the more deals you do, the greater that experience becomes. And it's like with anything. There are things that the first 5 deals that any investor or developer or whoever does, there'll be mistakes made. There'll be things that they don't do quite right. And I'm a firm believer that you learn far more from your defeats than you do from your victories. And I think that's important, having the corners knocked off you with property development. Because it's very easy I think a lot of people will come into property investing and development thinking, oh, this will be easy. And it's only when they actually get down to the nuts and bolts of it, that granular detail of having everything planned out and nicely organized. And sometimes these mistakes happen through no one's fault, but you learn that experience and you're aware of what not to do next time. And that's probably equally as important as what you do next time. So
100%. Talking about those things that you don't do, I mean, with your level of experience, I've heard you talk about some of these things in terms of some of the biggest wins that you've seen at the auction. At the same time, some of the biggest nightmares and catastrophes.
Yeah.
And only the investors got themselves to blame for the most part. Can you give us, off the top of your head, maybe one or two examples of a showcase great deal somebody who's managed to pull off at the auction, whilst also another that has failed miserably?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, it depends whether you look at it from a buyer or a seller's perspective. Certainly from the seller's perspective, I've seen things that have worked really well, in that we had one probably a couple of years ago that was, it was an industrial unit down in Rainham that there were two interested parties to, but it'd been on the market for 6-9 months. For ease of mathematics, I think around about 300,000. But neither party was prepared to go in and put their money on the table. They put it in the auction, and because of the interest it generated with some other parties coming in, particularly a couple of local churches, I think would recognise that they could be able to use that unit as a place of worship. We ended up getting, whilst the guide price and reserve was quite a lot lower than was being asked on the private treaty market, we ended up getting significantly more for the seller because of the competition that was created. And the two people who have been prevaricating, who could have bought it for a lot less, ended up, both of whom, upset that they've missed out. And I think that's one of the great things about auction. Another sort of good example, I had a client who had a property that was a receivership property. Very difficult to understand what the value was because information was limited, but also it was really problematic. There was a lot of tenancy issues and tenure issues and planning issues that needed to be overcome. And when they said, "What's it worth, Andrew?" I said, "If I'm brutally honest, I can't give you a proper answer on that." But what I knew was, I said to them, "If you let me guide it at 1.45 million, I know there'll be interest." We ended up selling for 2.75 million.
Wow.
And I think the only thing that I took from that was that I knew that if I'd said, "Let's guide it at 2.7 plus," I'd have had no interest. People would think I was mad. So there is that. And I think on the sort of the disaster side, touch wood, there haven't been that many, but there's always ones that stick out in your mind where people have bought things without really understanding what it is they're buying. I mean, I've had it in the past where, and this is a long time ago, we're sort of talking 15 years ago, where someone bought a portfolio of regulated tenancy properties, thinking that they were getting cheap properties, thinking that they were going to be able to let these out at market rents, but not realising quite what a regulated tenancy was. And I've had a similar situation with ground rent investments. You have if there's a house, what looks like if there's a house that's in two flats.
No, they didn't think they were buying the whole house for the ground rent.
But then the point is that it's like the guide price is £5,000, and this is a house in Hampstead. There's a good reason for this. So that and again, the other thing as well, short lease flats.
I was wondering where you were going with that. Not that. I can't imagine.
Yeah, and short lease flats as well. People not realising, not reading the legals properly, not reading the details properly. Something with only sort of 35 years unexpired, thinking they're getting a great deal, and actually the guide price was a great deal, but they're thinking that it's there's no renewal required. So I think the mistakes tend to come from people who are inexperienced and haven't taken the right advice or haven't looked at it properly.
It's been a bit cavalier with their approach, possibly.
Yeah.
Which is the thing is that you can't. It's really difficult to get caught out in that way. Doing private treaty, but with, of course, because you may have a solicitor that can catch a few of these things along the way. But if you haven't read the legal pack, or if you haven't viewed the property, you don't know about the big crack down the back of the building.
Exactly.
And therefore, you get what you deserve.
Well, I mean, I always think that, you see, it happens far less now with the live broadcast auctions because everyone's got to register for the lots they want to bid on. What used to happen in the auction room, in the ballroom auctions, was that somebody would miss out on lot 7 and they'd be steaming mad thinking, "Oh, I've been outbid, I was the underbidder there, I should have bid more, but it's gone now." and they'll turn the page and then go, oh, lot 11. Oh, I haven't really, having not looked at it.
I've got all this money in the bank.
That looks a good deal. Right, I'll put my hand up, and not realising, what's for it. So, people would get caught out in the past that way. And I suppose this is from a buyer's perspective, one of the advantages of the way that auctions are happening now. It's you're less likely to be bidding on something on a whim, and therefore less likely to catch a cold.
Which is, yes, better for the buyers, worse for the sellers, maybe for the auction houses as well, because they want to get as much interest on everything all the time. So this whole online, offline since COVID, how's that? Where are we at with it right now? Because I personally think that it should always be back in the room.
Well, I agree, and I think that it's a situation that I would love to get back to. I mean, I really, really miss the auction room because I don't. And this is the auction geek in me coming out. There's a sense of real joy on the day of an auction. The actual spectacle of the auction, the theatre of it, the chance to meet people. It's the marketplace that our ancestors would have gone to.
I think there's something special about that.
And I think that has been diminished by either online live broadcasts or online only bidding auctions. But the real problem that you have, getting back to it, is that people like the ease of being able to bid online. There have been a couple of London auction houses recently who have gone back to the room, either as a permanent thing or as a one-off. And I think the real problems they've encountered, and I've been to both these auctions, and the room is not buzzing. The room is not what you would want it to be, not what it used to be.
Why is that? You think everybody would rush back to try and...
Yeah, but the thing is, if you've got... Because most auctioneers, particularly if you're running most of us will run a 7 auctions a year pattern. So because of avoiding certain times of the year, certain religious holidays, trying to avoid school holidays, half term,
sure.
Easter holidays, we all tend to be, and no one wants an auction on a Monday or on a Friday.
Right.
So it's Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. And it's usually, you're probably in 1 or 2 weeks. So you might have 6 auctioneers, all with stock that you're going to want to bid on the same day. Now, back in the day, particularly as a trader, when you're looking at trying to buy half a dozen, in one go, you had to choose who you went to. You had to choose which auction house you went to. So whether it's Strettons or whether it's anybody else, if I've got the stuff in that they want, okay, they might come to me, but they know they're missing out on being able to bid somewhere else. So they will go to whichever one they feel they've got the best chance of, and maybe try and telephone bid at another. But now they can have 6 screens open and they can be bidding at the same time. Even with the live stream auction, they can do that. So the only way you'll get ballroom auctions back to being full again is if you don't have online bidding as well.
Which is everybody has to agree.
Well, you can brave it out and do it yourself, and we all then have the meetings that we used to have.
All right. So
the auctioneers used to go and sit in all sorts of boardroom and work out who's having their auctions to try and avoid each other. But now we don't need to because.
So you mean online auction, as in like just somebody sitting at home? Because if they're all on the same day, then they could still pick one, and then they've got to go to the one room.
Yeah, I mean, but that you'd have to everyone's dates would have to not clash, or you'd have to try and minimise it as best you can. It's not an exact science, so you can't. But the other advantage that we have and that works it works for sellers with things being online, as I touched on before, everyone has to register to bid. So when it's coupled with that, and it's coupled with the legal pack download numbers that we get, we have far better information about whether a property is going to sell or not and for how much it's going to sell. So we can advise our clients much better in terms of whether a property should be withdrawn or whether the reserve should be reduced or increased. Right. And as a result, everyone's success rate has gone higher. And from our perspective, that's what we want. Absolutely. From the seller's perspective, that's what we want. So trying to wean auctioneers and sellers off that is also tricky. And then there's the thing of cost. If you're broadcasting live from, like we do with our auctions, from our boardroom, I don't have to hire a ballroom and all the associated IT and whatever AV stuff that has to go with that. So that's what there's a reluctance from auctioneers to go back in for that reason as well. That's not something that everyone will tell you, but certainly it's a factor.
Yeah, absolutely. That makes sense.
And I think that, I never thought online auctions would take off. If you speak to David Sanderman at EI Group, who, is a great advocate for the online auction.
Oh, is he? He's an advocate?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, very much so. And pre-COVID, he and I would talk all the time. We'd go for lunch and he'd say, Andrew, you need to try this. I was like, no, this will never change. And it takes something like the pandemic, the lockdown, to force an industry like that to change. And I think that what's really weird is that prior to COVID, online auctions were the niche. The norm was the ballroom auction. Now it's the other way around. And I can see ballroom auctions working maybe out in the regions where it's perhaps a more local market and there's only maybe a handful of auctioneers rather than like in London where there's dozens of us. It working more there. But it's going to be a real challenge. And I've said I want to go back to the ballroom, and I've got clients who ask me that the whole time, but I've got to have a compelling reason. And at the moment, I haven't got one.
Strettons is the proud sponsor of this episode. Strettons is a leading multidisciplinary firm based in London offering specialist commercial and residential auctions, management and property advisory for investors and developers looking to add value to property across the UK. With over 90 years of experience and with 120 advisors and support members, their multidisciplinary departments partner with clients to provide measurable results. Every property presents unique challenges in the auctions, but with the right advice, opportunities can be harnessed. Strettons believe in looking at all aspects of a property and calling on individual specialisms to work as one. Their approach helps clients leave no opportunity unturned. If you'd like to find out more about Strettons and how they can help you in your property business, head to strettons.co.uk. Strettons is an auction house that I've personally used in the past and I've had an excellent experience with. Our guest for this episode is Andrew Brown. He's the Director of Auctions and has a wealth of experience in the auction sector. We talk about success rates, which is the big be-all and end-all of the auction house. Like that's how you compete with each other in terms of like we can get so many lots sold, and whether it's the ballroom that does it or it's the online method. One of the things that I was always told is that the success rates in an auction catalogue, especially across the board, will determine what level it's at, will determine where you are in the economy. Yeah. So if the success rate's low, then you're having a very slow economy. Yes. And as soon as you see that the success rate started becoming very high, that means the economy must be booming. And normally that's quite an early gauge whichever way the market's going. Yes. So where we are right now, we've just had wars in Ukraine. We've had 10% inflation for quite some time now. We've had rising Bank England rate. We've had the mini budget last year. Where are the success rates now in terms of expectations? And do you see the improving or getting worse? I think the other factor in there is for me, the level of success rate often is dictated by the trust that you have between auctioneer and selling client. I would always say to my clients when they think of undervalued something or my suggestion for guide price is too low, I would say, look, I'd be delighted to be proved wrong. If it's worth more, it'll go for more. And so, having the trust that I have with my clients, I'm relatively fortunate that my success rate is probably higher than the average because of the fact that I've got clients who trust me and that they they're prepared to take that leap of faith. But I think you're quite right in that there's always external factors. It's like with any part of the property market. With auctions, there's external factors that you can't control, and you are punished or rewarded accordingly with your catalogue success rate, depending on where things are. I certainly think that there are... The way I see the market right now is that it's in a bit of a flux. It doesn't really know where it is. And I think that whether you're a buyer, whether you're a seller, or whether you're someone who's valuing property, I think everyone's a bit skittish about
putting where the values are or where they think the values are going to go.
I think it's a little bit volatile at the moment.
Yeah.
I don't think it's going up necessarily, or
No.
it's certainly not, but it's certainly not going down either. And
No, agreed.
on one day to the next, you read the reports in the news,
Yeah.
and it's like, hey, we've had house price growth, I think, recently.
Yeah, exactly. And it's sometimes, I mean, sometimes it'll come down to stock, but it'll come down to that level of trust that sellers will have with their auctioneer in terms of, do they agree to sell those prices at the right level? Because look, every auctioneer ostensibly does their job the same way. You know, we all have most of us will have a similar sort of market reach and a similar sort of mailing list size. So we're getting the properties out to the same people. And I think that it does depend upon where the confidence is in that market. You know, but getting guide prices at a competitive level, you know, prices that jump from the page and scream "buy me" at prospective bidders, that leads to a high success rate. If you can get that, you'll have a high success rate.
Which is always the crazy thing of I had a property. I have a property still hasn't quite sold, but I went down the private retreat route. I still haven't personally gotten comfortable with putting my guide price so low.
Yeah.
To get that highest price, even though I've been told by every auctioneer and so many points of evidence that that's going to happen. And so, but that's apparently how it works, or at least it works very, very effectively.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's always anomalies within any system or process, but generally it works well because I'll give you a very quick sort of anecdote that I always give people, example, should I say. Bums on seats is the key thing to getting the fullest price at auction. So having the maximum number of registered bidders is key. And here's why. If you've got a property that's got a reserve at £500,000 and you generate sufficient interest that you've got two bidders, one values it at £510,000, one values it at £600,000. Now, once the bidding reaches 515 and Mr. 510 is out, Mr. 600 has no one else to compete against. He picks it up at 515 or 520 or whatever. But if you have 20 bidders all in a row, all valuing it between £500,000 and £600,000, then once Mr. 510 drops out, Mr. 550 comes in. Once Mr. 550 is out, Mr. 575 starts bidding. Same buyer ends up buying it, but he's paying the fullest price. And the most tried and tested way of doing that is having a guide price that looks so good that people will, you know, when they're looking through the catalogue, you know, most people look online these days. I still tell this story with a book in my hand. So they're turning the page and they think, oh, that looks okay, that's about its money, that's about its money. Wow, that's cheap. And straight away they're interested and excited. You can guarantee if there's one of those, there's 20 of those. So that's what you're trying to create with each lot that you have. And it's not possible every time. And there are always those that you'll take on that you think, okay, it's a bit full, but it's a good property. I know I've got potential people who like that sort of thing, they'll buy it. So you take those on as well. But in the main, we all try and get those guide prices at the most sensible level so that, and again, no one's trying to hoodwink anyone. You know, you'll have a guide price. If the guide price is 400,000, the reserves can be no more than 10% above that. So, you know, no one's playing any games. It's not like you can't buy at that. If you're the only bidder there, then you'll buy it at that level. But if it looks cheap, then you get that critical mass of bidders, which ensures that fullest price. If you've only got the two, chances are it's going to fall over the line just at reserve or maybe even not sell because too many people have dismissed it and thought, oh, I'll look at something else. Because in any given month, let's say there are 1,000 properties being offered, you know, from the top 10 major auction houses. Maybe it's more, maybe it's less. But your property is effectively competing against all of those properties for the attention of a finite number of buyers. So, you know, I'm talking very much to sellers here. But this is why, you know, and it's so rare the case that you don't, you set the guide price at a really competitive price, that you don't get those bidders. Because these, you know, most auction buyers, most of the experienced and regular auction traders, they're all looking at the catalogues and they will pick out those gems every single time. So it takes a leap of faith, definitely. But as I say, I'm a great advocate, and it's never I can't think of any examples when it's let me down.
And somebody once told me that our auctions full of problem properties, almost like problem children, problem childs. Yeah, basically you're only picking up problems. Like if you pick up something cheap, there's a reason for it.
Yeah.
So is that a fair kind of summary?
It would be churlish of me to say that there were not problem properties sold at auction. Of course there are. But there is a wide breadth of properties sold at auction. And various different types of sellers like it as a vehicle for disposing of properties because of the advantages that it gives in terms of speed and surety, the arm's length nature of the transaction. Particularly for if you're a receiver, selling something by private treaty can be problematic because if you do a deal at £500,000, it's very easy for a debtor to come out of the woodwork and say, well, hang on, my friend here would have paid £600,000, therefore, I'm going to be suing you, Mr. Receiver, for 100,000 shortfall that you've caused me to have. Whereas with auction, you can't really say that because it's an open market. Everyone has equal opportunity to bid. And as long as the property's been marketed properly, then you can't argue against that not being the market value.
That's the best price on the day.
Exactly. And there are those that certain circumstances, like a matrimonial dispute. I've got one at the moment where, the property is in the auction because it's in the auction by the order of the court, because the former Mr. and Mrs., neither of whom can agree on how to sell the property or what the price should be. So the court's taken that view, and of course they've had to put it through auction in order to, again, establish the best price. Sometimes local authorities like doing that sort of thing. So, yeah, there will be problem properties in an auction, but I'm not going to put a property in with massive subsidence or Japanese knotweed or some serious defect either in title or in property and not say that it's got a problem. We have, as I said right at the top of the piece, we've got a duty of care to buyers as much as we have to sellers to make sure that we are treating everyone in a way that's fair, and that we are anything that materially affects the property, we are obliged to disclose that. Now, I'm not going to put it in big red writing at the top of the page, but it's going to be in there and it's going to be in the legal pack. So if there's a problem if you're buying a problem property, you'll know about it. If you do the smallest amount of homework, you'll recognise that there are issues. So no one selling a property at auction is going to try and pull the wool over anyone's eyes. No auctioneer, should I say? If, as I said before, if you are buying a problem property, there's a good chance you know about it. And what I love about auctions is that we have certain buyers who buy nothing but problem properties. They love problem properties because they know that their skills and their experience are sufficient that they can fix those problems, and then they can make their profit that way. And they'll probably have, because of the problems the property has, they'll probably have less competition. So there are problem properties that are sold at auction, but it's certainly not all of them, and certainly it's not everyone is turned off by that.
And with the legal packs that are in there, I don't actually know the rule. Are you obliged to put in a legal pack, or can you sell one without a legal pack?
Well, there are basic documents that you need to be able to sell a property at auction. So, I suppose the absolute bare minimum is land registry office copy entries and plan, and a contract. That's the bare minimum. Now, I don't think I've ever had maybe a handful of times where you've had the absolute bare minimum. Nearly always you'll have special conditions. You'll have searches, any planning documents, any lettings, details of leases and lettings and that sort of thing. And there'll be all sorts of different searches, not just the local authority search, the chancel searches, the coal searches, all of those sorts of things. And we will always encourage our sellers to make sure that we're giving as much information as possible because, the more information you give a prospective bidder, the more confidence they have. Therefore, they're more likely to bid, and they're more likely to bid a fuller price. So it's not in a seller's best interest to scrimp on the legal pack. And I always think that people normally are quite rightly suspicious of anything that has a very flimsy legal pack. because what's someone trying to hide?
Yeah, yeah.
You know, and I think that's always, you know, so it's never good practice for any seller to have a very bare legal
I guess
pack.
that affects the end value that you're going to get, because the
Yeah,
less
of
you're
course.
showing, that's going to. So
Yeah.
if it has very little showing, then you're going to pay less for it, but then you're paying to take on whatever potential problems may come out the woodwork.
And who's to say it could be something completely innocent? It could be a very valid reason for it being a very sparse legal pack, depending on what the nature of the property is. But that's going to be few and far between. So it all, you know, as I say, if you look at something and think, I haven't got enough information to buy this, then you're daft if you then go ahead and bid strongly on it. Doesn't matter how good it looks, you know, there's a chance that you're buying problems. But we always do our level best to try and make sure that as much information is there as possible. Like viewings, you know, sometimes we'll get tenants who are reluctant to allow viewings to take place. And I always say, look, it's entirely up to you if you do or don't, but, you know, think about the sort of person who buys an investment property, residential investment property, without seeing it first. Do you really think that's a good landlord? Do you really think that's someone who's going to care about, you know, fixing the leaky roof or your central heating's packed up? So if you want a bad landlord, fine, don't allow us in for viewings. But if you want someone who's going to care and who's actually going to, you know, take an interest in maintaining their property and seeing that value of it maintained, then, you know, we would like to get the best potential landlords in to see the property. So, you know, it's you know, we're trying to get the best price for our client, and, you know, a good solid legal pack and, you know, being able to do viewings are two of the real cornerstones of making that happen.
Absolutely. With those lots, what are the weirdest lots you've seen? Because I don't know how long ago it was, maybe a couple of months. I saw a couple of phone booths.
Yeah, I've sold phone boxes. So phone boxes, public toilets I've sold that eventually got turned into cafes. I'm not sure I'd want to be having a coffee from there, but hey, I'm not here to judge. We've sold titles, you know, the lordships of various different manors.
Oh, title meaning just a lordship.
Being able to call yourself lordship, or call yourself the lord of. Various. I mean, there's lots of different. I mean, most auction stuff is fairly run of the mill, but there's always something that can be water towers. I've sold water towers in the past as well, and some of the investment things that you would never imagine. You know, mobile phone masts. They're all on the sites, a little site, and of course they're great because they're let to really solid, Vodafone or O2 or E or whoever. You know, so solid investments, and these are nice little, very much sort of the sort of investments that you can just put away and not have to worry about.
Income producing assets.
Exactly.
Pretty certain.
Yeah. They're never going to go anywhere, and there's never going to be, you know, they're never going to need a boiler fixed. You know, it's that. So those are good, interesting. But I mean, when you act, I've acted over the years for local authorities, and it's amazing. It's just amazed me all the interesting different types of properties that local authorities own, and that at some stage might need to dispose of. I mean, I remember selling the gatehouse to a cemetery once. That had planning permission to turn into a house.
Wow.
So I'm not sure I'd like to live there, but hey, it sold well, and, you know.
Digging it up. What if you dig up some famous bones or something like archaeology?
And all the jokes from the rostrum come out with those sort of, you know, dead centre of town, you know, very quiet neighbours, all this sort of stuff. It's, you know, it's you know, but so they're always good fun.
And when people talk about auctions, there's this thing called the modern method of auction, which, I don't know, there's some stories about them, there's some myths about them. Are they vastly different? I mean, the way that they approach things, I feel like they're vastly different to traditional auction. And just the fact that they call it modern method of auction.
Yeah.
What is the big difference? And are they governed differently in any way?
Well, they're. I mean, I think the term modern method of auction is a bit of a misnomer. I think that it's, you know, essentially the differences are that with a traditional auction, let's give them the common names. With a traditional auction, when the hammer goes down, that's an exchange of contracts. There is surety from the buyer's perspective and the seller's perspective. The buyer pays a 10% deposit equal to 10% of the purchase price, and normally they'll have 20 business days to complete. Very straightforward. It's an arm's length transaction. There's no shipping of price, anything else like that. The price that the hammer goes down at is the price that the buyer pays, and it's very swift and clean, to use an expression. Modern method of auction, as I understand it, and I've never really sort of had a great deal of involvement in it, is you're effectively bidding on an option to buy. So a modern method of auction, I would say, is very much akin to a private treaty sale. The only difference being that that person has bought exclusivity for a period of time in order to get exchange done. So there's limited difference for me, and it's far more akin to a estate agency and private treaty sales.
I was going to say, isn't it just because I think that's some people saying that actually it's just an estate agency doing it slightly differently.
Yeah, I mean, the fact that there is an auctioneer and there's a bidding process is probably the only thing that makes it similar to a conventional auction, because you've got an exclusivity period in which time to exchange. So when you look at our results and you say, right, we have sold X amount of property this month, that's exchange contracts. Now, all right, not every property exchanges, but it's very, very small, a very, very small number each year where don't then complete, and there's usually a very good reason for that. Whereas, you know what it's like with a private treaty sale, the hammer going down with a modern method of auction is the equivalent, in my eyes, of a sale agreed in private treaty. Now, anyone who's bought and sold anything by private treaty knows that there are a multitude of things that can go wrong between sale agreed and exchange. And you don't have the other benefit of auction of that. So you don't have the surety and you don't have the speed, because it's still a lengthy period of time before exchange, and then you've still got the completion. So
and you're only putting down a small deposit or a reservation fee, and then if it doesn't go through, then you're still back to square one again. Yeah,
exactly. So it's a look. I don't wish to speak ill of anyone doing things that way. It's an innovative way of doing things. But as I say, I don't think it's. I think it's far more akin to, just because it's got auction in the title of it, doesn't make it an auction. I think it's far more akin to a private treaty sale than it is to an auction sale. So I don't know about governance for it. I mean, obviously, with a traditional auction, we're governed by the RSCS, and we have the RSCS common auction conditions. I don't think the same thing applies for modern method of auction. So, but again, the fact is, it's a sale agreed. So it's not, the necessity isn't there for that. But I think that people conflating the two as being the same thing, just one being a modern method of it, I don't agree with. I don't think that's right.
Agree. I've got a few questions as well here.
Sure.
I just want to read out to you.
Yeah.
And a little bit more of a quick fire round. And the questions aren't very short and snappy.
Okay.
But as a property auction director, what are your primary responsibilities facilitating successful auctions, and how do you oversee the auction process from start to finish?
Okay. Gosh, I'd love to give a quick fire answer to that one, but it might take a little bit longer. We have a cradle-to-grave, semi-automated CRM system that does everything from catalogue production all the way through to letters and producing terms, powering our website, right through to doing the contracts at the end. So that is a vital thing for anyone doing the number of auctions, number of lots that most auctioneers will do these days. I have a team of auction surveyors who will go out and value the properties and go out and deal with all the inquiries and deal with the selling of these things. And then we have administrators who look after the admin side. But I think the key things are, I've always said that you need a very limited skill range, fortunately for me, to be a successful auctioneer. You've got to be organised and you've got to be good with your clients, and that's about it.
Sounds fair to me. What tips would you give an investor that's never purchased at auction before?
Okay. It'll probably touch on what we talked about before, in that doing one's homework, getting to know the auctioneer, understanding where value can be added, and knowing your exit strategy. Oh, and also, when you go to the auction and you bid, setting a limit being very important, and sticking to it as well. My job as the auctioneer is through a series of persuasion and charm and cajoling is to make sure I extract every pound that I can from my selling clients. And it's my job to be persuasive, to make you bid one more bid.
And you can bounce bids off the wall?
You can make commission bids on behalf of your client, up to but not including reserve. You can tell from that. The cadence of that answer, that's a question I've been asked many times before. Now, so you are legally allowed to do that. Any auctioneer's standard terms will, questions about the auction will provide for that. So what I could stand there is and say, right, okay, well, bid is at £90,000. I can make a commission bid on behalf of my client for £91,000. Will you go £92,000? Because what you're effectively saying there is my client below reserve will buy it back in. They would rather buy the property back in.
So they can only bounce off the wall below the reserve.
Correct. So you can't take a bid off the wall because, so just to unpack that slightly more. So rather than saying, me being really dull and boring and saying, I've got a commission bid on behalf of my client, I will just take another bid off the wall, as it were. And, there's no, some people watching or listening might sort of think, well, hang on, that's not right, that's not fair. But bearing in mind that if it's below reserve, it can't be bought anyway. So at that price, at the current price, the property can't be bought because it's below the reserve. So once you get to reserve, then you can't do that anymore because you're at reserve. It's going to be sold. That's the minimum selling price that the client has set. So if that bidding then gets to 100 and that's the reserve, well, if there's no one else bidding, then it's knocked down at £100,000.
That's not as bad as I thought, because I always thought that you could just keep doing it forever, but it's actually only up till the reserve.
You can't.
It was never going to sell anyway unless we got you to the reserve.
And anyone doing that above is, well, it's not throwing straight dice, and it's being quite disingenuous with towards their buying clients. I mean, look, I will probably, with at least half my lots in an auction, I might take the first. If there's no one bidding, I might take the first one off the wall to get things going. Usually what you find is, once you take one, someone else will bid. Particularly if I sort of say, all right, so, only bid then 90,000, I raise my hammer, straight away. It's like a forest of hands going up.
Literally happened to me once. I was thinking, oh no, because there was no bidders straight off the bat. And I was like, oh no, and he kept on taking it lower and lower a few times. And I was like, oh my God, this is like... Can't believe I took half the day off to come and watch
exactly.
But literally, as soon as the first bid came in, it shot way back up.
No one wants to be the first bidder. And I think it's always, I always sort of have a line when, people are waiting to make their bid. And I say, look, it's not going to get any cheaper. So, and I do think that, there's a misconception that, if it keeps going down and down and down and down, I'm going to pick up for a lot less. The point is, every lot at auction, unless you've got a declared nil reserve, in every auction house in London will have a reserve price. So there's already been a minimum selling price that's set. Where one starts is not the point, it's where one finishes. So that is something that it's not always known, but no, certainly I don't know any auctioneer, and they're very foolish if they did, who would take a bid off the wall above the reserve, or at the reserve or above the reserve. And it would be very bad practice if they did. So I'm sure all my colleagues would not say that.
How, with the advent of technology and tech and everything, and AI more importantly, how has the conversation in auction circles been going as to whether it can be embraced and enhance what you do? Is there any talk about that?
Yeah, I mean, we've looked at AI recently. I asked one of these online chat sort of AI thing or something to write auction particulars for a certain property. I gave them just the address, and it's amazing, And I thought this is going to be a bit rubbish, and I looked and was like, okay, that's very good.
Very decent.
And I think it's very, very clever stuff. And I think that if we embrace it and harness it, it can be a good thing. The problem that you have with the auction industry is that we're all, grey hair and all a bit stuck in our ways and like the way that things are done. As I say, with the movement towards the online auction would not have happened without COVID. Guarantee you'll be set. My auction on Tuesday, we're in a ballroom, and so would everybody else's, with one or two.
Yours is not in a ballroom on next Tuesday.
No, it's a live broadcast auction. So we don't do the eBay style online only bidding. It's ostensibly the same thing. The only difference being, rather than me in a ballroom with a load of people, it's me in my boardroom at the office with a camera on me. So you can see the action going on, but I can't see any of the bidders. All I see is names on the screen. But you still have telephone bidders and you have proxy bidders, but the vast majority of the bidders, these are just names on the screen now, rather than seeing the whites of people's eyes. So, but no, I think the technology side of things, there's definitely some advantages, and whoever harnesses it could do very well from it.
I guess the big difference is when the next generation of auctioneers are going to be talking about doing the auction day, they're going to be going like that rather than the auction catalogue.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the catalogue is something that is still very important to us, and I think there's a level of nostalgia that we want to...
They're not a thing of the past yet.
No, not really. I mean, we still produce the catalogues. I mean, when I first started, if you had a 30,000 mailing list, everyone would be getting the hard copy catalogue. Now, where probably the numbers are, hugely swayed with people just taking an online catalogue, but we still produce it because we like, every day I still use the catalogue. We've got a great, wonderful automated system, but I like, someone says lot 26, I want to be able to just flip. Right, okay, which one? Oh, right, okay, great. And I write my notes on there, and it's just, it's a lot easier. So, yeah, I think that, and again, some of the younger members of the team perhaps will question the value of whether we need a hard copy catalogue. But I think it's something that still, a lot of our clients prefer it. And, we did have a try a few years ago where we would try see if we could reduce the number of catalogues we were producing. And people phoned up and said, "Oh, I've not had the hard copy catalogue." We wrote to you and said, "Well, we're going to send you the online one." Yeah, I don't want that. I want the paper one. And I think people will still like to be able to sort of,
absolutely
pick it up and look through it.
I remember when I was farming auctions, which was it was about a good year, not the most successful year of my life when it comes to auction buying properties from that method, but. I used to look forward to getting, because again, I used to like flipping through it. I used to like circling the one that I thought,
absolutely.
Okay. And I guess you can do it on a screen, but it's just not quite the same. No. But I think the next generation is just going to obviously have their way with it.
And I think when you look at things that were always produced on paper in the past, those things are nearly all online now. And I think that we're certainly going to see a movement toward that. And I know that there are some auctioneers who now don't produce a hard copy catalogue. And, maybe we're a little bit more old-fashioned at Strettons, I don't know. But, we like it, and I know that our clients like it. Now, and as with anything, if someone gives me a compelling reason to do something, I'll do it. And if I think it's going to help our clients, or it's what our clients want. And I do think that is such an issue with so many service industries. They don't listen to their clients. People think they know what their customers want. And actually, they don't. And all you need to do is ask them. So we do quite regular surveys to our mailing list to say, do you like what we do? Do you like, what could we do differently? We did one quite recently, and they said, we'd like an email to come out a few days after the auction, telling us exactly what's still available. So we now do a specific unsold list lot.
I can imagine that's quite popular.
Yeah. And talking about market percentages and changes and what the average yield was. So now we produce a bit more of that data as well. And it's just, and we no sort of marketing consultant genius sort of came up with that. We just asked our customers, and they went, "This is what we'd like." And we're like, "Oh yeah, I'd like that as well." So it's it's far better when it's organic like that. So.
And talking about that database, typically. Final question, demographic of your buyers, typically are they traders, are they end users, are they property developers, are they investors?
There's a genuine mix. I would say the vast majority of our buyers are investors. Second group would be the developers. Then you've got the property traders as well. Now, we will have people on there who have a specific need for a type of property that they want to be the end user for. So whether that be a retail, office, industrial, or residential premises. But they are few and far between. Not few and far between, but they are certainly make up a much smaller percentage. So the vast majority are people who are looking for property investments, or they're the guys who are looking for something they can either develop in terms of a built from the ground up, or are looking to renovate and recondition a property to sell on thereafter, either to let or to sell.
Makes sense. And to go back to the quote which I started with, which was the emphasis that you put on putting your people and your clients first.
Yeah.
Why is that so important to you?
I mean, I'm really lucky that I've got a group of people who I work with who make my job the most pleasurable and easy job that you could come across. These are the guys who, at the coalface, both in terms of my fee earners, my surveyors who go out and look at the properties and sell the properties, and my administrators. They're the guys who really put the hard yards in on a monthly basis. And I do think that because of that, what's important is rewarding them and making sure that they feel valued and are stakeholders within our team. And it's very similar with my clients. What I tend to find is my clients start as buyers, then become regular buyers, then they become sellers, and then regular sellers. And establishing that trust is vitally important for me being able to get the best price for them, because they trust me to put the right guide price on it, and hopefully it'll sell accordingly. And it's not an exact science. And I think that the communication is really important. Clients generally will go away with a positive attitude, a positive impression of you, even if you haven't sold the lot. I'm talking about selling clients. Because if you've communicated properly with them throughout the process, they understand what's been happening. If I phone a client today, and it's the first time I've spoken to them since instruction, and said, we need to drop the guide price by £50,000. They're like, well, what, why? And it leaves a sour taste. So I think that communication is absolutely key. And I try and work very closely with my buying clients as well, because actually I have far more interaction with them on a regular basis than I do with my selling clients, because they might be a bit more seldom in terms of coming to me for things to sell. But my duty of care is always to the seller, first and foremost. That's the person who's paying the bill. That's the person I've got to look after their interest the best. But that doesn't mean to say that I don't have good relationships with buyers. And
of course,
it's important that they have that level of trust as well. That I'm throwing straight dice. That I'm not telling them things that I'm telling them everything they need to know. But I think that is, and look, I'm very fortunate in that I have, for some of my limited intellect, has achieved as much as I have, and that's down to the clients and staff that I have, around me. I think that if people like you, if you're likable and you're easy to get on with, and you shoot straight, generally people are quite happy to give you the instruction. And I'm lucky that in my limited skill range, that's something that I'm quite good at, relatively personable. And I think that means that I've got on well. But that's down to the people that you have around you. And I think that there's a guy who was on one of the talks that I'm not sure we're on the same one together, but he talked about having a power team around you, and that really resonated with me. I thought, that's what I've got. And whether it be clients, whether it be colleagues, it's really important to have good people supporting you.
Absolutely, which is actually, I think you might have touched on a few of the points for my next question, which was, you're obviously very successful in what you do as a property person. You've been doing for many, many years. Your in-laws have been doing as well.
Yeah.
For other people that are wanting to get into the industry, what sort of personality traits or what sort of characteristics do they need to have to be successful property people?
I think you actually have to have a bit of a split personality. Certainly from people who are, like, if you want to go onto the client service side, working as an auctioneer or within a surveyor or whatever, it's pretty straightforward. You've got to be personable, organised, and as I say, good with your clients, which kind of feeds into being personable. From a property developer and trader, and you do need a bit of a split personality, and you need to be able to, you've got to be organised and disciplined, but also a risk taker. Because there's, that extra bid, pushing it to your limit is really, really important to get that right property, but also not overpaying is really, really important. So I think that the people who do best generally tend to be the ones who will take risks. But there's lots and lots and lots of people who've been in this industry a very, very long time. And they've done that by always seeing every angle, every possibility, every potential bump in the road. And I think that's really, really important. But I think as important as well, is resilience. Not being put off or upset by the fact that either you don't get the deal that you want, or that you get the deal that you want and it doesn't work. You fail. You've got to have that willingness to pick yourself up and go again. Absolutely. And I saw a lot of people come through property and build up portfolios and be doing very, very well in those times from sort of 2001 through to 2007, and then from 2012, 2016 and 17. Who made those mistakes, but the property market always bailed them out. The rising prices always bailed them out. And sometimes I look at some people and think, how have they made it? They never make a right move, and they do. So sometimes there's an element of luck in it as well. Right now, when the things, we talked about the market, it's not going up, it's not going down. There's a relative sort of flatlining of it, and there's an uncertainty there. Now is the time to be getting your experience so that you can really hit that launch pad of a rising market, of a strong market that will come again.
Which I think
in the cycle
is around the corner. Yeah,
I agree. But it's now building that experience and building that the contacts and everything else like that. That then when that springboard comes, that's when the person listening to this who in 3 years' time will be a property millionaire. It's that person, that right at the start of that journey today, building that experience, building that knowledge, that will then be platformed, going forward.
Well, on that note as well, thank you so much for joining us today, Andrew. I thoroughly
pleasure.
enjoy listening to you as well, speaking so passionately about auctions, speaking so well with a wealth of experience. I'm sure there's lots more. On this day of today of recording a few podcasts, we've been talking about doing some roundtable sessions. It'd be great to get you back with a developer and an investor and talk about what we're seeing in the market and how that goes, because we thoroughly enjoyed it.
Yeah, it's been brilliant.
Cheers.
Fantastic.